We're all born equal, and the rest is drag. Truer words never spoken, those by RuPaul, probably the most famous drag queen of all time. Really, and consistent with science of the Human Genome Project, that 2003, that did found that there's no systematic bias between any form or group of human beings in terms of our ability to succeed and thrive intrinsically or extrinsically. We are all roughly equate in terms of our advantages and disadvantages, to no net differences between us. There is one human race. A beautiful sentiment. So I wanted to dedicate this episode to drag queens and transgender people everywhere who may be struggling for recognition or allyship from the gender binary conforming community of which I'm sadly a part of. This is for you.
Hi, I'm Ian, human changemaker and founder of Daylight Consulting, the sapient change engine and humanity's first Clarke tech. This is Daytime for the Changemakers, and this episode is all about realness. Let's get real.
I can see way more than the visible light spectrum than you. And I've got telepathy. What do you mean you don't believe me? How can you tell? How can you tell? It's a really good question. How can we tell that we all see the same thing? I mean, we covered before in perspective how we don't all see the same thing. But I mean more than that. How can we tell whether humans, specific humans, don't have superpowers? The answer is it's very difficult because we can't see from each other's perspective. The only way is to verify whether someone is telling the truth by assessing their realness. And that's what today's episode is all about. I often tell people, because some of my theories are quite out there, and people don't believe me. And that's a very rational response to be human skepticism, is to want to verify the reality that everyone is telling you about. But I often say to people, it's okay if you want to hold me to a very high bar, and you should do, but you should also therefore hold yourself and others to an equally high bar. Take, for example, what we learned at school. I'm sure that anyone watching from outside the UK may have significantly better historic knowledge than I do. Certainly I dropped it when I was 14. But certainly what I can remember from history and a lot of my peers is learning about things like the Treaty of the Union and Henry VIII, the history's most misogynistic man in the world, who literally left papal control in Rome in order to separate the Church of England just so they could behead a few more women and marry a few more of those. Why are we teaching kids about this guy exactly when we should be teaching them about humanism? How can we be sure these things that happened hundreds of years ago actually happened when even our recent history has been erased? These events here, still within the living memory, certainly of my parents, and yet neither of my parents have any recollection or knowledge that they happened whatsoever. If we're able to erase recent history through nothing more than a little bit of ignorance and oppression, then how can we possibly imagine that the historic record from hundreds of years ago is accurate? The historic record is a memory, and like all memories can be misrepresented. So I'm very keen to talking about, we're building up to, obviously, to authenticity, which we'll do in a later episode. But right now I want to talk about realness, and that is whether you can tell that I'm being real. Right, we covered last week how Descartes concluded that sapience means that he is real. And I'm sapient, so I'm real. And you're watching this and hopefully taking it in, so you're sapient as well. But how can you and I verify that we are real together? That is the next logical conclusion. And I like to call that realness. Now, the best example of realness I can think of is in drag, and specifically the transsexuals, because they are phenomenally comfortable in navigating this gender divide. So those of them who have reconciled their identity certainly are. Drag finding its roots, I believe, in the Greek antic theatre movement of the 1650s, back when dragging your dresses across the floor was, that was really where the term came from, I understand. And back then it was illegal for women to act in men's roles and vice versa. So, but particularly women were disadvantaged by this mostly. So some men took it upon themselves to start to wear women's clothes and makeup in order to provide a cover for women that wanted to indulge their curiosity and try and play in alternative roles, which I thought was a beautiful display, one of the earliest records of allyship. assuming it happened. And then fast forward to the Shakespearean theatre era of sort of the 1850s. And by this point, certainly with the advent of shows like Punch and Judy, it became far more common, and it was also de-legalised for men and to play also women's roles. Hey Geraldine, what's going on? Oh, hey Jack. No, I'm gonna do that again. I want a cracker. Okay, I did it again. The point being is that you had one puppet master who was expected to play both gendered roles, and therefore there was no longer an opportunity to be able to segregate those two meaningless things through law, and society was liberalising as well. Then you maybe probably the next biggest point in the movement was Marsha P. Johnson in 1969, Stonewall riots. Now Marsha P. Johnson was a black bisexual trans woman. So she was a man who was transitioning, certainly in terms of her own gender identity, towards being a woman, if not anatomically. The two things are different. Gender identity is how you feel on the inside. Do you feel as a man or a woman or something else? Whereas sexual identity is who are you attracted to and who would you want to procreate with and have sex with and all that sort of stuff. Two different concepts, and clearly both spectral concepts as well. I think why we've got this LGBTQIA++++ is because we're trying to put labels on a spectrum, and therefore no one is able to do that because we're human beings and we're phenomenally complex human beings as we are, and that's why I think that you're getting all of these letters of the alphabet being added to an acronym that really in an ideal world wouldn't exist, or maybe we just call it queer, or maybe we just call it human. Which I much prefer. Nevertheless, it happens. So Marsha P. Johnson, back then, the police regularly raided gay bars. This is in Greenwich Village in downtown New York, if any of you have ever been there. And the bar still remains there today, still the Stonewall Inn. If you were wearing women's clothes, again, illegalized again, men cannot wear women's clothes, outrageous. So the police would raid regularly, and anyone they found to be cross-dressing, at the time it was called, female police officers would take them to the restrooms, and they would ask them to disrobe to prove which gender they were. And naturally, this is very disturbing and very, very, very distressing for the gay community. Marsha P. Johnson read the room, having so much uniqueness and embodying so much uniqueness that she did. She threw a brick at the police one raid, and instead of arresting her as they tried to, the crowd rallied around her, and what followed was 6 days of rioting across, I believe, 6 blocks of downtown New York. That was a standoff between the police and the local community that ultimately led to the local community succeeding and the police agreeing to back down on the raids, liberalising and emancipating the gay community in what became the first gay pride march ever, and is still repeated to this day, now 63 odd years later. Phenomenal allyship from someone in a real marginalised community to a much larger community that was actually unable to help itself. And I find that fascinating as well, because she read the room. She understood what people wanted and needed, and she took charge by showing true leadership. She used her sapience in multiple levels. She built a common identity, and she also brought people together in a level that the police could never imagine was possible. A real change maker, and a legacy that lasted, I was tearing up, a legacy that lasted long after she was alive. So I love that. Marsha P. Johnson was real, and we owe her a huge amount. Now, Alok Fade Menon was one of my favourite commentators in this area. If you don't know him, or her, sorry, they, Alok Fade Menon is a gender non-binary philosopher and commentator on gender identity. One of his famous podcasts I've watched one of their famous podcasts, I'm so sorry, it was talking about how we've all experimented with dressing in an opposite gender, and how most men will try it and then they'll get told off and never do it again. And that really resonated for me, because I did the same when I was very young. I was about 5. A mum came home and I was wearing her dresses, and I never did it again, because the amount of scorn that I got from her was so clear that this is a line that we shouldn't cross. But I also find that very interesting, why this is such an important line. Why is it about the gender divide that makes it so unacceptable for humans to be able to go there? Realness is all really about how prepared you are to cross those lines, those socially constructed lines that are totally meaningless, in order to explore the full extent of your uniqueness. And the more prepared you are to do so, the more real you are proving that you are to the rest of us. So that's my definition of realness, and I use it a lot. One of the third services we do is authentication of whether it's a science or a firm or of an individual, to make sure that they are real people. And they mean what they say. The last point I'm going to end with this one is the movie Ghost. If you've ever seen Ghost, one of my favourite movies, 1990. Now, this movie starred Demi Moore and Whoopi Goldberg as the two female lead characters in a show where Demi Moore's husband, Patrick Swayze, was murdered by a group of white heterosexual men who were committing some crimes. And he caught them in the act, also a white heterosexual man, by the way, and they killed him because they didn't want him to expose their crime. But his ghost had unfinished business because he wanted to resolve this crime. So he came back and made himself known to Whoopi Goldberg, who at the time was playing a fortune teller, a fraudulent one at that, who was trying to pretend to people that she could speak to the dead. But little did she know, she actually could. And Patrick Swayze was able to tap into her additional human superpowers in order to communicate from beyond the grave with her specifically. She went on to then speak with Demi Moore, and a whole heist and adventure came through. Now, for those of you familiar with the story, who do you think should have won Best Actress? Whoopi Goldberg and Demi Moore. Which one? Unfortunately, we don't have to decide, because the Saturn Awards 1991 already decided for us and gave Demi Moore the Best Actress award. In fact, Whoopi Goldberg has never once won an Oscar for Best Actress. Neither has any other black woman in history other than Halle Berry. All 99% of the Best Actress awards have gone to non-black women. It's such a shame that the Oscars are so vividly biased against the authentic amazingness of our black leading ladies of Hollywood. Nevertheless, who are we to argue with awards? The reason why I agree in this case is because there were 4 things that made this movie a massive success and didn't just end with Demi Moore slamming the door in Whoopi Goldberg's face the moment she said something preposterous like "I can see ghosts." You see, Demi Moore's character was oozing with curiosity. She understood that there were things about the universe that she could not possibly comprehend nor know, and she had a duty of care to get things right. The next thing is human sapience. Demi Moore was oozing with critical thinking, abstract thought, complex reasoning, and she was able to put things together and use wisdom in order to assess whether something was credible and real or not. The third was Whoopi Goldberg, an actress playing an inauthentic character and yet coming across so immensely authentic that her character was so compelling. She was able she had nothing to lose, nothing to gain. There was no money involved. She put herself in harm's way to help Demi. A phenomenally incredible performance on any level imaginable. And then finally, empirical evidence. Patrick Swayze's ghost was able to move the coin using his thoughts, his sapience, and he was also able to pass information between the wall to Demi Moore, to Whoopi Goldberg, on what was happening beyond the wall. So those 4 things together made the story immensely human, and that really made it for me. Sapience, curiosity, compelling credibility and authenticity, and evidence and empiricalness. So for the rest of this series, I am going to ask you, if I can give you all the evidence that proves that I can make a sapient change engine, backed up by full human authenticity, that I'm real, will you do me one thing and give me your very best? What's wrong with just calling it human? Human beings!